This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 41 of Season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, October 14th, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Forge Village section. Services will be held in St. Andrew's Mission at 7:30 o'clock tomorrow evening, Reverend A.L. Bumpus officiating. This was a Saturday, so that would be on Sunday. Miss Mary E. Lord of South Framingham visited with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. David Lord, over Sunday. Mr. and Mrs. William Petherick of Leominster were guests of Mr. and Mrs. William Burnett on Sunday. Mrs. Hilda and Edith Normington of Worcester visited friends here during the week. Mr. and Mrs. Conrad Richards are rejoicing over the arrival of a baby girl, Regina L.R. Richards, at their home on Tuesday morning, Sunday, October 8th, 1911. Mr. and Mrs. Harry Holland of Worcester spent Sunday at the home of Mrs. Mary Drake. Mr. and Mrs. Chester Lawrence of Dorchester were guests of Miss Grace Lawrence the early part of the week. Mrs. Ernest Longbotham, née Polly Burnett, and son, William A. of Arlington Heights, were guests at the home of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. William Burnett, over Sunday. The Abbott Worston Company shut down on Wednesday for the remainder of the week for a short holiday. Operations will be resumed on Monday morning at the usual hour. Mrs. James Whigham and little daughter Doris are visiting relatives in Worcester. Mr. and Mrs. John Morton and baby daughter Lillian M. visited at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Fenimore Morton on Sunday. A daughter, Edith Frances Charlton, was born last week, September 29, 1911, to Mr. and Mrs. William Charlton of Groton. Mrs. Charlton was formerly Miss Laura Hindle of this village. Miss Maria May has been confined to her home this week, suffering from blood poisoning in one of her fingers. John Edwards is having his home wired for electricity. Mrs. Charles Blodgett, Mrs. William Blodgett, and Mrs. Chester Blodgett of Groton Ridges visited Thursday at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Mason of Lowell. The Sunday school children of St. Andrew's Mission are preparing for their concert to be held in the near future in Recreation Hall. Through the kindness of the J.V. Fletcher Library of Westford, books will now be delivered from a special branch library in St. Andrew's Mission. The library will open on Sunday afternoons at 3:30 o'clock and on Sunday evenings at 7:30. Also on Wednesday evenings, Miss Teresa Lowther will have charge. So Forge Village once had its own branch library. Who knew? The next section is the Westford Center section. The Ladies' Missionary Society of the Congregational Church met in the vestry on Wednesday afternoon. Miss Loker, the president, conducted the meeting with a program of interest. Plans for the season's work were discussed and decided upon. A study of missions to India will be carried out. The society has 21 members, and 6 have just been added. A tea was served at the close of the meeting and social hour enjoyed, after which a meeting was held to plan out and appoint committees of the socials for the season. An outline for each month for suppers, socials, etc. was planned, and judging by preceding seasons, will be effectively carried out. At the meeting of the Grange last week, Thursday evening, voting for candidates occupied a part of the evening, followed by a program of music and readings. The stores of J. Herbert Fletcher, now Connelly Insurance on Lincoln Street, and Wright and Fletcher, now Muffins and Main on Main Street, including the post office, will close 3 nights each week, beginning October 12th, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. They have been closing for some time on Tuesday and Thursday evenings at 7:30, and townspeople having errands at the stores will bear in mind this additional evening of closing. Welcome visitors expected for the weekend at Mrs. Edward Prescott's are Mrs. Charles P. Marshall and daughter Marion, joined by Mr. Marshall on Monday. Reverend Charles Marshall was pastor of the Union Congregational Church on Lincoln Street from 1905 to 1910, so not too long ago. This was 1911. Mrs. Homer M. Seavey is preparing to go next week for a week's stay with Mrs. E.J. Meacham of Holyoke. Mrs. Ida M. Gould will superintend Mrs. Seavey's household during her absence. Mrs. Meacham was formerly Miss Millie Smith, who taught at the old Center Primary here, and one of the pleasant group of teachers who boarded at Mrs. Seavey's. Among the Baldwin apples being harvested by D.W. Wheeler are some measuring 12 1/2 and 12 3/4 inches around. The Unitarian Society are perfecting their arrangements to entertain the Unitarian Conference of Churches in the beautiful old First Parish Meeting House next Thursday with cordial efficiency. At the Ladies Missionary Society on Wednesday, Miss Miranda Luce contributed to the interest of the meeting with a loan exhibit of rare articles gathered in many lands by a sea captain ancestor. She's Miss Miranda Luce is the daughter of Reverend Leonard Luce, who was the first pastor of the Union Congregational Church when it was built in 1928-29. RFD carrier Samuel Balch of Route 2 has been having the customary 15 days vacation allowed by the postal authorities, and Warren Carkin has been taking his place on the route. Miss Edith Carter underwent a successful operation for appendicitis at the Lowell General Hospital on Friday of last week and is making satisfactory convalescence. The next two paragraphs are about Rally Sunday. It was Rally Sunday at the Congregational Church last Sunday, and it proved true to name. There was fully 150 in attendance. It was a combination church service and Sunday school. Special music was furnished by Miss Edna Ferguson and Edson G. Boynton. There was an address by Albert McQuestion of Lowell, treasurer of the Lowell District Sunday School Association. This was in place of the usual sermon. At the conclusion of the address, Houghton Osgood, superintendent of the Sunday school, took charge, and the 3 junior classes of the Sunday school gave an exhibition of their regular work. Shorter addresses were given by Reverend David Wallace, John Wright, and Houghton Osgood on what the Sunday school can do for the church and what the church can do for the Sunday school. Next, we have an obituary. Robert S. Young died on Saturday evening at the home of his stepson, Walter Merritt. Mr. Young had been in failing health, suffering from chronic enteritis. The deceased was born in Chautauqua Basin, Canada, almost 18 miles from Montreal, May 27, 1838, making him 73 years old his last birthday. Mr. Young learned the printer's trade in early life and came to Lowell as a young man. For many years, he held a responsible position in the printing office of the J.C. Ayer Company, from which he retired in 1895 after 26 years' service. About 2 years ago, he came to live with his stepson, Walter Merritt, where he resided until his death. A prayer service was held at the home in Westford on Tuesday at 11:30, conducted by Reverend David Wallace, pastor of the Union Congregational Church. This was followed by a service at the Lowell Cemetery Chapel, conducted by Reverend N.T. Whitaker of Lowell, a former pastor. There was a large gathering of friends present. Interment was in the family lot in the Lowell Cemetery. Mr. Young was a member of William North Lodge of Masons, of Oberlin Lodge of Oddfellows, and of Wanalancet Encampment of Oddfellows. Undertaker David Grieg had charge of the funeral arrangements. Mr. Young was the last surviving member of the family of his generation. Next, we have an item on the Tadmuck Club. The first meeting of the Tadmuck Club took place on Tuesday afternoon at the vestry of the Unitarian Church. This is the a rather large ladies' club in Westford that met in Westford Center. Miss Sarah Loker, who has always been the club's Hardy Choice as president, presided, and in her opening remarks expressed much pleasure that the loyalty to the club's best welfare had so evidently lived over vacation, one manifestation being the large and enthusiastic audience present. Miss Loker brought to the consideration of the members the making of a change in the Constitution, thereby making the membership limit 100 members instead of 75. Action will be taken on this at the next meeting. There is at present a considerable waiting list. The program for the afternoon was a home afternoon, quote, home afternoon, end quote, and was most attractively carried out by the committee in charge. The vestry was decorated with autumn foliage and flowers, rugs, and pillows. The plan was to make it an afternoon of informality and sociability, balancing some of the more studious programs. The members were invited to bring their work, and there was a roll call interspersed with readings and music. These consisted of a fine piano selection by Miss Julia Fletcher, preceded by a descriptive article of the same prepared by Mrs. Frost and read by Miss Edith Lawrence. Miss Pauline Wallace and Miss Lillian Sutherland gave a vocal duet. There was a violin solo by Miss Evelyn Hamlin and Miss Daisy Cabell, Cabele, read, quote, Seeing Things at Night, end quote, and Miss Howard Mason of Leominster recited one of Kipling's well-known poems, Lasca, Lasca, both with excellent effect. Seeing Things at Night was written by the American writer Eugene Field, who was best known for his children's poetry. His father was famous for representing the slave Dred Scott before the U.S. Supreme Court in Scott's 1857 suit for his freedom. Lasca was written in 1882 by the English author Frank Dupre, not by Rudyard Kipling as indicated here. His best-known work is the poem about a Mexican girl and her Texas cowboy sweetheart caught in a cattle stampede, a rather unusual subject for an Englishman. The roll call consisted of responses of household hints, items of local interest of an earlier date, etc., and was entered into with an excellent spirit. At the close of this, the folding doors into the smaller parlor were drawn, displaying a pretty tea table trimmed with autumn leaves and lighted with candles with red shades. Mrs. Winthrop Wheeler and Mrs. John Fletcher presided over the teacups, and a group of young maidens acted as waitresses. Those in charge of the most successful afternoon were Miss Marion Sweat, Miss Edith Foster, Mrs. Cyril Blaney, and Miss Winifred Burnham. Next we come to Sam Taylor's About Town section. The proceeds of the cavalry dinner, $105, has been given to the Unitarian Society by the men of the society who contributed the dinner. The H.E. Fletcher Company are contractors for an arch bridge at North Conway, New Hampshire, for the Boston and Maine Railroad. Peter George is foreman, and Frank McGlinchey, Archie Bell, and William Clements are assistant laborers. They report snow and cold weather in the White Mountain region. The bridge will be completed about November 15th, when the workmen can go south as far as Massachusetts. Alexander Ferguson, who has been living in the Hamlet Cottage at Brookside, has moved to Lowell. Also, among their other movables, George E. Prescott has moved from the John Decatur House back to Lowell. The next meeting of the Board of Registrars will be held at Moore's Mill at Brookside next Friday from 7:45 to 8:45. This is the unregistered voters' chance at Brookside and vicinity to obtain the legal equipment for the state election. Mrs. Edwin E. Haywood of Arlington has been visiting her old home and neighbors in Westford during the week, returning to Arlington on Thursday. At the annual meeting of Middlesex North Agricultural Society, held at Lowell on Tuesday, George Troll, I think it's spelled T-R-O-L-L here, but I think it's probably Troll, T-R-U-L-L, of Tewksbury, was elected president. Howard Foster of Tewksbury Committee on Institutes Honorable Herbert E. Fletcher and Samuel L. Taylor, trustees for Westford. Some ripe raspberries were picked on Francis Hill on Monday by the writer, as Sam Taylor, who was one of the many trustees of the Hill. He loved the strawberries. The next section is entitled Conference. The North Middlesex Conference of Unitarian and Other Christian Churches will hold the autumn conference with the First Parish Church Westford Thursday, October 19th, it being the 91st session. The following program has been arranged for the morning session. 10 o'clock, hymn and prayer, 10:15, reading of the minutes, new business, 10:30, the Men and Religion Movement, a talk by Reverend Albert Lazenby of Lynn, 11:10 discussion, 12 devotional service conducted by Reverend Oliver Fairfield of Littleton, 12:30 dinner, which will be served by the ladies of the parish to persons attending the conference. Afternoon services, 1:30, music and singing, 1:45, roll call of churches, committee reports, election of officers, 2:15, quote, The New Spirit in Religion, a talk given by Reverend Abraham N. Rybany of Boston, minister of the Church of the Disciples. Mr. Rybany being a Syrian and recently came to the Unitarian denomination. 3, discussion. 4, benediction and adjournment. The electric cars from Brookside to Westford will run every hour during the day, leaving Brookside 5 minutes past the hour and Westford at quarter of the hour. I think they mean during the day of that particular conference. That's not the usual schedule. The Old Parish Church, Reverend Benjamin H. Bailey, minister, has had a venerable career, having been organized in 1727. Its gilded dome has weathered all storms and still points towards, quote, the way, the truth, and the life, which is a quote taken from John 14, verse 6. The Old First Parish welcomes its friends to this conference for truth and righteousness. The next and last paragraph is entitled Barn Dance. The annual barn dance of the Westford Athletic Club was held at the Town Hall last week, Friday evening. The rain reduced the attendance but did not affect the quality, which was well versed in foot lore and the art of barn dress and manners. Not all represented the real barn dance style, but those who did were conspicuously and pleasingly noticeable. Other attractive features were 2 artificial game birds securely crated on the center of the stage with the uniforms of Shirley and Townsend across the breast, while on top of the coop another bird arrayed in the Westford uniform was perched. The teams representing these towns were beaten in a series of 3 successive years. The hall decoration added greatly to the farm barn dance and were the contrivance of Elliot Humiston, aided by Miss May Balch, who made and contributed the game birds to the decorations. Those are the 2 most noted decoration people for dinners and meetings like this in the town. The well-known Hibbard Orchestra of Lowell, who was all music, kept everybody lively, keeping up with the music. Miss Bertha Norris was awarded first prize for best costume. That's the news in Westford for the week ending October 14th, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.